Today we'll be presenting an overview of another Alcohol Research UK funded project, entitled Constructing Alcohol and Identity, how young people navigate and make sense of online intoxigenic marketing and culture. Just to start with, acknowledgements to Harry Sumlow, who was key in putting the bid together, also to Emma Begley, who's another researcher on the project, and the telephone research team, who have been a great help in terms of data input. I don't think we would have be at the stage in the research that we are without their help. So just to give you an overview of the presentation today, we've split it into two. So I'll start by going over the aims and objectives, say a little bit about the methods, just provide some context in terms of what we already know about this area of research. And if I get time, I'll say a little about some of the applied theory. And then Kim will go on to discuss some of the very early findings. We've just finished data collection, so we're yet to do a fully in-depth analysis of the data, but already there's a few themes that are emerging that we hope to explore in more detail over the next few weeks. So the overall aim of the project was to explore the role of alcohol, brands, consumption, drinking practices, and also the kind of general concept of a drinking occasion in young people's construction of identity. And in doing so, we wanted to explore the specific role of social networking sites, such as Facebook and Twitter, in young people's drinking culture, and whether they had a role to play in young people's formation of alcohol-related identities, specifically within the context of the peer group. And whilst doing so, we wanted to pay particular attention to how this process of identity construction may be a classed and gendered process. So to meet these aims, we had a number of objectives. Firstly, we wanted to explore how alcohol brands consumed by young people are marketed on social networking sites. We then wanted to know how young people engage with such marketing and the general views on some of the advertising techniques used. We were then interested in comparing the use of social media by the industry to the use by kind of alcohol-related information and health campaigns, and whether the campaigns that do exist that were using social media, whether they actually related to young people. We were then interested in how young people engage with peer-generated content on social networking sites, and the extent to which alcohol and drinking feature as part of young people's online identities, so their Facebook profiles. And all this information will hopefully give us some indication as to whether social networking sites have a role within young people's drinking culture, and whether that role social networking sites have a role in their identity construction. In terms of the methods, we started by conducting a content analysis of alcohol advertising on social networking sites, Twitter and Facebook, and we also conducted an analysis of a number of social networking alcohol campaigns. We then conducted primary research, so friendship group interviews with young people aged 15 to 21 who were recruited through schools, colleges, universities, youth groups, and also just within the wider community. And we then took a subsample of those participants, and we're in the process of conducting an analysis of their Facebook profile for alcohol-related content. So just to move on to give you a little bit of context in terms of the different areas that cross over here. So we have youth culture, social media, and young people's drinking culture. So firstly, it's an obvious one, but we know that social networking sites are of increasing importance to young people's leisure and their social lives. And research shows that casual interaction online helps to encourage and enhance interaction offline, and it also reinforces, confirms and strengthens real-life group identities. And this includes young people's shared drinking experience. Therefore, we view social networking sites as a space that provides a means for young people to create, present and perform specific types of identity, and that may also be identity in relation to alcohol consumption. We know from the general literature that young people are exposed to and create a variety of different online contents, which may have negative but also positive effects. There's usually quite a lot of kind of demonisation around young people's use of the internet and social networking sites, but we've come from the perspective that there may be positive and also negative effects of this. And importantly, social networking sites are clearly a network in which young people can communicate about a range of health-related issues among themselves. So specifically to discuss the role of social media in young people's drinking culture, as I've stated, it's clearly a space in which young people can act out and create identity online in relation to alcohol. I'm sure you've all seen it yourselves, but there's a range of content on social networking sites, depending on the friends that you've got. Drinking photographs, alcohol-related content, statuses, interaction with third-party devices, and interaction with alcohol advertising. And we also know from the literature, it's quite a small amount of literature that exists, a lot of it comes from New Zealand, but we know that social networking sites clearly have a role to play in the concept of a night out. It's important in reliving the drinking experience and also in creating drinking stories which are shown to contribute towards confirming group bonding and group identity. We also know that young people carefully construct and manage the alcohol-related content that they create, and some research suggests that having a pro-alcohol profile is viewed positively among peers. The research that has been conducted in this area is arguing that peer-generated alcohol content may encourage the existing culture of intoxication among young people. But I think to some extent it's fair to say that the verdict's still out there on that one. It's quite difficult to untangle whether social networking site content merely reflects an existing culture or whether it reinforces and reproduces. So in terms of social media and alcohol advertising, it's clearly becoming a space where young people are exposed to an increasing amount of alcohol marketing, and the industry is putting more and more money into marketing their products online. So here we have an example of a large drinks company that's putting 21% of its advertising budget onto social networking sites, and they have around 1,000 marketers in what they call Facebook boot camps. Age restrictions and a number of regulations exist to try and monitor the advertising of alcohol on social networking sites, yet there's an increasing amount of evidence to show that young people are still being targeted in more creative ways than there would have been through traditional media. Social networking site advertising also changes the relationship between the consumer and the marketer in the sense that to some extent consumers are becoming marketers themselves, kind of advertising brands on behalf of the industry through a number of marketing techniques and advertising techniques that Kim will touch on in the second half of the presentation. And in contrast, we know that there's little evidence to suggest that young people specifically are actually engaging in official health-related campaigns and advice and Facebook pages via social media. So there seems to be a big gap between the industry's use and the kind of health lobby's use to some extent. Okay, theory. I'll try my best to summarise this as quickly and as simply as possible. We've applied the Pierre Bourdieu's concept of capital to the project. So first of all, we frame drinking and social networking sites as an extension of the space in which young people can create and act out what Pierre Bourdieu defined as capital. And there's various different types of capital, and firstly being social capital, which is simply put who you know. So the social networks that you keep and participate in have social value, provide a social resource, and in turn kind of provide prestige and a social status within a specific group. So this can be applied to the youth peer group, for example. However, social capital is dependent on other forms of capital. So importantly, we've got the concept of cultural capital, which is key to being accepted and key to justifying your position within the social group. So certain youth groups, for example, will attach meaning, importance and status to particular cultural artefacts, consumer products, particular behaviours, leisure activities, experiences and knowledge. And this can be applied to alcohol and drinking practices. And we know that young people may deliberately construct drinking experience with the purpose of creating cultural capital, which in turn leads to social capital, so i.e. inclusion within the peer group and therefore a social status in relation to alcohol within that group. And cultural capital is key to what Pierre Bourdieu defined as distinction, and through leisure activities such as alcohol, people can distinguish themselves from other groups that they may see as different or less desirable, and in turn this cultural capital and distinction creates group and individual identity. We then have the simplest form of capital to some extent, which is economic capital, which is simply having the economic means to participate within a social network, so having money to purchase alcohol, having money to purchase the right type of alcohol, attend the right side of events, the right type of venues that social group puts and attaches meaning to. And lastly, we have symbolic capital, which is the most kind of abstract form of capital. And this is the process through which all forms of capital are symbolised and depicted to an audience. So participation and status within, say, a peer group is dependent on cultural capital, so alcohol, drinking experience, being symbolised and viewed by others, the peer group. So again, this can be applied to specific objects, experiences, attending certain events, etc. So maybe a useful way of thinking about this social process in terms of alcohol would be to think about the caricatures of maybe the stereotypical, I don't like the word myself, but the WAG celebrity style drinking culture that we see all around us, and compare that to maybe the increased popularity in real ales among another type of maybe youth group, to the person that likes fine wine. There's very distinct forms of cultural capital that's going on there, but it's the same social process in terms of being included and excluded from a particular cultural group. This process in itself is usually very classed and gendered in nature, and they're two concepts that we're focusing on within the project. And in general, I think it's quite a useful theory in trying to understand the complex social processes that goes on in youth peer group. We tend to use the term peer pressure, and quite often we hear it all around us in the media, and it's quite easily a term that I use myself. But peer pressure sometimes gives the impression that young people are quite passive consumers, that they just mimic someone because they feel pressure to do so, when actually there's a lot of social issues going on within the process of drinking. This concept can be applied to food choice, academia itself. It's quite a useful tool. So that's the theory we're applying, and Kim's going to present some of the very early findings.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. I'll just really quickly go over the brand findings that we've had, and then I'll talk a bit more about the focus groups. So the 5 brands that we looked at were Wicked, Budweiser, Foster's, Strongbow and Smirnoff, because they were viewed to be seen as brands that are frequently consumed by the age group that we're looking at. We looked at their websites, their YouTube accounts, their Twitter and Facebook, and we found that all of the brands tended to use the social network sites rather than YouTube and the website, so I'll focus a bit more on this. They had lots of different ways of interacting with users, so we've got some examples there, such as games, quizzes, sponsorships, like links to official events. What we did find was that there was very little direct marketing. Wicked did sort of tweet about a few promotions that were in various bars and supermarkets, but other than that, it tends to be a lot more related to lifestyle association. They did run a lot of competitions though, and that was like one of the key ways, and they tended to be the posts that would get the most interaction with users. And there was quite a lot of direct interaction between the users, so the young people or us, like anybody really, and the brands. So people would comment or post, and often the brands would reply. And that was like obviously one of the key ways of getting through to people and sort of promoting their brands. It did say on Twitter and more in depth on Facebook about the actual regulations of using these social network sites. And a lot of the brands tended to lay the regulations out very similar to the CAP code, so the sort of advertising standards. So they did say that they did monitor the pages and they would remove posts that they thought to be inappropriate. And just at the bottom, which you can't see unfortunately, there was a massive gender bias in the ways that the brands were trying to interact with people. We found that any brands that used celebrities, for example, to promote would mainly use men, and they only ever used women in the same as like at the same event as a man. So no women were used on their own to promote the brands. Before we did the focus groups, we just asked for a bit of information from all the participants, just so we could get a quick snapshot of the sort of how they do drink and if they drank at all. The majority of our participants did drink alcohol. 10 didn't, and they were all for religious reasons, and 2 participants said that they had tried alcohol. They didn't like the taste of it and they didn't like the sort of effects of it, but they did say they may drink in the future. There was quite a variation in how often people drank. And one of the things we'll look at is sort of comparing that to our Facebook data from those that have agreed to sort of take part in that part of the study, and also maybe look at the age differences in that. All the participants who did drink would drink in groups and none of them drank alone, and the average age for first full alcoholic drink was around 13 years. One of the interesting things when we did this survey was they would often talk to the people around them before they put their answers down. So that means that perhaps the results aren't necessarily that truthful, but it does show how it was an important part and that they didn't want people in their group to go, oh God, you've had your first drink at 7. Like, they were quite careful about what they put and they would discuss answers. And you did tend to see when you look at them, a lot of them would put the same age for their first drink in their friendship group. So this is just quite a basic overview. Like Amanda said, these are like only early findings. We haven't had any chance to do any in-depth analysis yet, but we sort of have an idea of what sort of themes are emerging. The majority of our participants said they didn't actually engage with official alcohol brands on social network sites, although they were aware of their presence. One of the reasons for this, which sort of relates back to that idea of Bourdieu, is that a lot of them access social network sites on their phones. They don't see as much of the adverts that pop up if you use it on a laptop or a PC. Although one of the things that we had in schools that were maybe in slightly more deprived areas was not all of them had smartphones, so then they would say that they saw it maybe a little bit more online. They said that they were more likely to take notice of alcohol content on their friends' pages rather than on an official page. Those are the participants who were over 18 or who had started to go on nights out in town said that they did, however, engage with bars and nightclubs, which is something that we thought was really interesting. I think it's something that we're hoping to take further, and that they would be more likely to tag themselves in a location rather than the younger participants who tended to be drinking in their homes. One of the other things that we found really interesting about this was the idea of tagging yourself in a bar was considered to be quite uncool by a lot of the younger participants, and a lot of them said that they tended to favour Twitter now over Facebook, and Facebook was very much seen as a social network site for older people. So I don't know what everybody thinks about that. And Facebook was seen as a way to share photographs along with other social media such as Instagram and Snapchat. And with the exception of special occasions such as like 18th birthday parties, which a lot of our participants were either taking part in or were getting ready to take part in, they didn't use social network sites as a way of organising nights out, and they tend to phone or text each other. In terms of the intoxigenic identity, quite a few people said they did make assumptions about people based on what they saw on social network sites, and they said that they would often think twice or delete something off their social network site if they thought that people might have a negative perception of them, or if nobody commented or liked it, they'd also probably delete it because then that suggested that nobody else was agreeing with them. Young people said that they did really carefully consider what photographs they put up. They were quite happy, most of them, to put up bad photographs of their friends, but they would never put a bad photograph of themselves up. And they did say that they would often untag photographs as well. They said, we asked all of them, what would you say your ideal drinking photograph is? And the majority was saying that it's like a group photograph, it's been planned, you know, everyone's gathered round, and you all look like you're having a good time. And that was very much sort of part of the whole role that alcohol had to play in the night out, was to have a good time and to help that. And social network sites were a way of then sharing the memories, and they said that they'd often go back and look over photographs. It was very much bound up with the idea of preloading as well, particularly with the older group of participants, that they would often do that, and that would be a lot of the time when they might share the most content of their nights out in terms of statuses and stuff. Whereas photographs tend to be shared the day after. Interestingly, while we were planning the focus groups, the nomination craze sort of came in. So we took that opportunity and asked people about that. And it was generally seen as being quite negative by all the participants, but they did recognise that maybe social media obviously gave it a platform for the trend to spread, but they said that they didn't think it encouraged it, in that they often saw that those people that were taking part in it would probably have drinking habits like that anyway. So we thought that was quite interesting. In terms of brand stereotypes, we showed them some examples of the 5 brands that we looked at, and we asked them to maybe talk about other stereotypes. Drink choice tended to be very gendered, and drinks such as wine and alcohol pops would tend to be seen as girls' drinks, and whiskey and beer, especially pints of beer, were associated with boys. They associated particular brands with age groups, and a lot of them suggested that WKD is a drink that under 18s drink and that's marketed at them, which obviously it isn't because it's an alcoholic drink, they're not meant to drink it, but they very much saw that as being a kid's drink. And then there was a lot of negative stereotypes associated with brands such as White Lightning, Lambrini. Interestingly, though, in tying back into the idea of sort of symbolic capital that Amanda was discussing before, these brands obviously had quite a negative symbolic value, but also some more upper-end drinks also had that. So they were very much saying, oh, well, if you drink that, it looks like you're posing or you're showing off. So it sort of went both ways, really, in terms of types of drink. And also drinking spaces were really important. So people would often report drinking certain drinks in certain types of drinking establishments. So, for example, you might drink a cider or a beer in a pub, but you would never, you wouldn't want to drink that in a nightclub. And cost was really important as well. So drinks promotions and stuff like that, they seemed to be quite key on what people were drinking. One thing we found, though, was with a lot of the younger participants, they did say that they would rather drink a drink that they enjoyed the taste of rather than something just because it's cheap. So if they didn't have much money to spend on alcohol, they just have a couple of nice drinks rather than have like a big bottle of cider or something like that. And the other thing we noticed, like a distinction between university students and their drinking habits when they were at home and when they were at university. And they said that they'd probably use social network sites and pay more attention to drinks promotions and different places when they're at university rather than when they're at home as well. As I said before, we did have some participants that were non-drinkers. We had quite a mixed response about non-drinkers. We asked everybody what they thought about them and if there was anybody in their group that didn't drink. The majority of participants who did drink alcohol didn't think that non-drinkers were excluded from nights out. They thought they were still able to engage just as much as everybody else in social events, although they might maybe leave early. A minority did say that they might avoid inviting a non-drinker to an event that would have heavy alcohol consumption because they said they felt quite uncomfortable. On the other side, those who did abstain from alcohol did say they did feel excluded from certain events. As I said before, they all didn't drink because of religious reasons, and there might be other cultural factors there. But again, this shows how drinking is part of our cultural capital, and that it's quite important into what social situations you can be accepted in. And then just finally, like I said, like Amanda said before, we also looked at some health campaigns. One of them was the Dry January campaign that obviously Lindsay just spoke about, but there was also Drink Aware, Go Sober, and Drink Wise, I think was the other one. What we found when we were looking at them was none of the major campaigns were targeting under 18s. Obviously, some of them are aimed at students, and we did notice with Dry January that a lot of universities were getting involved and encouraging students to take part, but none of them were aimed at under 18s, and they were often aimed at like parents and teachers in terms of educating young people about alcohol and trying to regulate what alcohol they might consume. In terms of their online presence, we found it was quite limited and not to the extent of the alcohol brands that we looked at, which shows how campaigns might be struggling to keep up with the sort of brands in terms of trying to get through to young people. We did ask participants if they thought that health campaigns could possibly have more of an online presence and if they thought that would be helpful. Some of them said that yeah, and if they saw an advert, like they do it down the side of their profile for a brand, if they saw a campaign they might click on it out of interest. But they also said that they wouldn't want it to be traceable, so if they clicked on something, they wouldn't want it to show up on their profile that they'd gone and sort of sought advice about alcohol. So there's quite a mixed response really to the use that campaigns can have online. So just some concluding remarks really quickly. We did find that participation in drinking culture and social media and the global alcohol marketing are part of a complex social process, which young people define, distinguish and belong through the creation of carefully constructed identities. And that was something that really came through, and it's something that we're going to look at more when we do an analysis of the Facebook profiles. We're going to look at the types of photographs they've shared, the types of statuses, what they've liked. Obviously there's lots of brands that are online, but there's also like unofficial groups. So we're going to see if they try and engage with any of them as well. Obviously, social network sites are rapidly developing. One thing that we've noticed, like I said before, is the change of platform, so the shift from Facebook to Twitter, and that's probably going to change again in a few years. And when we look at previous studies that have looked at alcohol brands online, our results are showing different from what they had, and they are only a couple of years old. So you can see how the platforms are changing, and social network sites are definitely an area where young people use to reflect their identity, and this includes like their intoxigenic identity. So what we're going to do next is we're going to code our transcripts from our focus group so we can get maybe a bit more of an in-depth analysis on what the participants have said. And we're also going to do our look at the Facebook profiles. We've literally only just had the data collected from them. It was quite a lengthy process, and that's where the telephone team really came in. But yeah, that's it from us.